President William Ruto is urging Gen Z protesters not to set their country on fire. In what looked like a break from his usual harsh tone, the president appeared to plead with the protesters to be part of the solution, saying they were sending a message. Why do Africans admire Traore, while Kenyan police, yes, police, are the ones shouting enough? This question is spreading like a flame in darkness. And if you follow African politics, you'll understand this isn't just a moment, it's history in the making. In Burkina Faso, a young president named Traore has not only turned down the IMF but also cast away fear. He's moved people with strong words, bold actions, and, most importantly, his faith in his people. Meanwhile in Kenya, one of the most developed countries in West Africa, it's the police, the very keepers of law, who are now marching in protest, refusing to serve as tools of a system that exploits them. This is no longer just about politics, it's a clash between two leadership styles, one that inspires, one that drains. Let's lay out the facts to understand what's unfolding in both countries, forcing Africa to pick a side. Kenya, July 2024. Thousands of paramilitary police flooded the streets of Nairobi, shouting enough is enough. Some took off their uniforms on camera, resigning from a government that no longer listens to its people. For the first time in decades, even law enforcement was protesting against the very system it upheld. Why inflation had crossed 20%, the local currency was losing its strength, and IMF loans pushed the Kenyan government to slash public spending, cutting bonuses in the police, education, and health sectors. At the same time, in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore showed up at a community education fair in Ka. No bodyguards, no grand stage. He said, "We don't need loan conditions, we need living conditions." He turned down the IMF loan, instead asking the people to contribute, and was welcomed as a hero. No protests, no police presence, just young volunteers fixing schools and giving free lessons. So what's really making the difference? Is it policy, leadership, or people's trust? To understand, we need to look deeper at both nations and how these leaders chose such different roads. What made Africans connect with Ibrahim Traore wasn't fancy speeches or a military outfit, but that he felt like one of them. He wasn't born rich, didn't study in Europe, and didn't copy foreign politics. He stepped into politics with just one thing, his candor. When he said no to the IMF, Western media called it foolish. But to the people of Burkina Faso, it wasn't foolish. It was the first time in years someone had the courage to say no for them. On a continent where leaders often speak for foreign powers, Traore stood up for his own. He didn't promise salary hikes, he didn't promise subsidies. He promised to return land to farmers and restore trust to those forgotten. His talks weren't held in air-conditioned rooms, weren't live-streamed in HD. He sat on the ground, listening to women talk about lost farmlands, children missing school, and youth desperate to leave. In a place where politicians only show up during elections, a leader sitting among villagers with no cameras or scripts was unheard of. And the most surprising thing, the love for him didn't just come from Burkina Faso. People in Mali, Niger, Senegal, even Nigeria, those tired of the same old political cycles, began calling him names like son of the mainland, the second Thomas Sankara, or simply the one who speaks for us. Have you ever admired a leader not because of their promises, but because of their quiet timing and readiness to do the hard thing? Imagine someone boldly saying, "We're not poor, we've just lost trust." Would you stand behind them? While Traore rebuilt his country through belief, Kenya responded to crisis in the exact opposite way. In Kenya, when the police began to protest, it wasn't just a strike, it was a cry from the core of the system. These weren't poor farmers or the unemployed, these were state authority figures. But stuck in a spiral of debt, budget cuts, and rising costs of living, even those who once enforced the law were now suffering. Between 2021 and 2024, Kenya borrowed over $9 billion from the IMF and other global lenders, and as always, the price of that money was high. Austerity slashed public budgets, increased VAT and cuts to education and health. The police force was downsized, their allowances were eliminated. In many regions, salaries were delayed by as much as 3 months. The outcome, the police lost faith in the government. And when the police stopped trusting the system, the public's already fragile trust collapses further. The cracks between the people, the police and the government became too clear to ignore. In a video now viral on Kenyan social media, a police officer removes his badge and says to the camera, "I did not betray my country. I just don't want to keep serving a system that's lost its humanity." This moment shocked Kenya's middle class, not because of riots, but because it uncovered something deeper. The system is crumbling from within. While Traore inspired people to give, in Kenya it was the guardians of law who were the first to reject their roles as silent enforcers. So what happens when the security forces, the pillars of the state, begin to question the very justice they're sworn to protect? Can a nation survive when even the paid protectors stop believing? This is the moment to place both countries side by side, not to compare, but to understand. In the face of the same crisis, why does one rise while the other falls? Burkina Faso and Kenya share much in common: public debt, soaring costs, lost public confidence. but their responses couldn't be more different. In Burkina Faso, when faced with a budget gap, Ibrahim Traoré didn't follow the IMF's austerity playbook. He turned to the people. He invited civil groups, village elders, youth, women, and even small business owners to a national dialogue. Together, they explored ways to build an economy that sustains itself. Traoré didn't command, he asked. If you were president, what would you cut first to protect food and education? This sparked not just answers, but action. Citizens donated land. They offered labor to build public works. They protected power stations from sabotage. In Kenya, the government did the opposite. It enforced IMF reforms immediately, cutting civil salaries, hiking consumption taxes, delaying paychecks. No discussion, no town halls, just decrees and a police force to keep order. The irony, the police, the very people used to enforce those decisions, were the first to rise up. When citizens saw officers being treated like disposable tools, they understood, if even the police are suffocating, who's left to speak for the people? One leadership style is rooted in openness and shared action. The other, in orders and silence. The other side relies on imposed policies, hoping the people will hold out just long enough. These are two ways to handle a crisis, one that inspires hope, the other that quietly drains it. If you were leading a country, which path would you choose, to hide behind policy or to step forward and face the people? But the real difference isn't just policy. It's in how leaders define power and service. When a nation faces collapse, people don't read policies. They look for people. They don't study IMF conditions. They look into their leader's eyes and ask, is this person truly for me? And on that simple but vital question, Ibrahim Traoré didn't need a campaign. He already had the answer. Across Burkina Faso, you won't find his face on giant billboards or shiny digital screens. But in every village hall, on handwritten notes from his speeches, the message rings out, I am not your savior. I'm just the first one who told you the truth. Traoré doesn't promise miracles. He lays out real steps: land transparency, returning resources to local communities, vocational training for youth. He empowers rather than commands. Meanwhile, in Kenya, and across many African nations, people are watching a repeated pattern. A leader remains distant, speaks from behind palace gates, shows no emotion, offers no dialogue. And when the crisis arrives, citizens don't know who to turn to, because they don't even know who their leader really is. Beyond a distant face on TV, there's no connection. The biggest gap between these two models is not just policy, it's trust. Personal, grounded trust. Traoré, through simplicity, resolve, and the courage to say no, has built something priceless. Political capital that can't be bought, natural trust. In a world run by image and calculation, can there still be space for a leader who leads with only honesty and dignity? Do you still believe that a common person, not a billionaire, not a political heir, can transform a country? But just as confidence was building and protests were spreading, something unexpected happened, something that flipped everything. A twist that nobody saw coming. Looking at both Kenya's protests and Burkina Faso's volunteer movement, a clear pattern emerges. Both are signs of Africa waking up, but in very different ways. In Kenya, the police cry of enough quickly spread to civil society. Students, nurses, teachers, all began sharing their frustration, online and in city squares. But this isn't just random outrage anymore. It's focused. It has a message. It's directed at the dependent development model the country's followed for decades. The anger isn't just about being poor. It's about becoming poor because of failed leadership. In Burkina Faso, something different is unfolding. Not protest, but participation. Youth are organizing groups to fix farming tools. Women are creating cooperatives to bake bread and cut imports. Students use radio to tutor rural kids. These aren't state programs. These are self-started responses. The natural energy that comes when people feel included in the vision. Because when people believe in a national goal, they help build it. When they don't, they tear it down. Which one do you think creates lasting change? Destructive rage or responsible awakening? If your own government handed you the keys today, would you be ready to take charge? And if so, what would fuel your first decision? Economics, education, or something deeper? Faith. Let's look deeper. In Burkina Faso, something remarkable has happened in just 6 months. No national campaign, yet society is moving like a recovery machine. In Kaya, farmers once blocked by fertilizer shortages are now using homemade biofertilizer. In Bobo Dioulasso, architecture students are building clay homes, no concrete, no imports. In Ouagadougou, people are cleaning streets, planting trees, renovating schools, all without state money, banners or bonuses. What drives them? One thing: the belief that the country belongs to them and that their leaders are listening. Meanwhile, in Kenya, after the police uprising, the wave of unrest spread. Teachers, healthcare workers, and transport staff joined in. Civil society groups began financial justice forums. They're reviewing loan agreements, accessing IMF contract terms, and publicly questioning ministers on social media. What does this mean? People in both nations are waking up, but one side through building, the other through confronting. Traore hasn't started a trend. He's triggered a long-term shift, a movement where citizens no longer wait on the government but take initiative because they know the state will support, not stop them. And others are watching. In Mali, Niger, Chad, even Ghana, Traore's story is being told on radios, Facebook pages, and village meetings. Can a country truly rebuild itself not with wealth, but with belief? And if you lived in such a country, what would be the first thing you would do to help rebuild? But as people began believing, other forces began fearing. Then came the unexpected. As the world began talking about the Traore phenomenon, something began not with guns, but in quiet rooms. Not a war of bullets, but of influence. It started in financial summits in Paris, Brussels, Washington. Just 2 weeks after Traore announced the expansion of land reforms and called for agricultural self-reliance, a curious wave of headlines swept across Western media. Burkina Faso enters a period of instability. Lack of investment puts West African nation at risk of economic crisis. The timing was not a coincidence, it was a signal. Soon after, global credit rating agencies followed suit, downgrading Burkina Faso's economic outlook. Despite no signs of default, foreign investors pulled out. Local banks were suddenly blocked from international transactions. It was not an attack with bullets, it was an attack with numbers. While the people of Burkina Faso were laying bricks, the financial world was quietly pulling out the foundation, one credit line at a time. And then came the next twist. Universities across the country were abruptly stripped of funding from international academic partners. The reason that Burkina Faso's educational model no longer met global standards, but everyone understood what it really meant. If they couldn't control the government, they would try to control how the next generation thinks. Not through war, but through silence. Not by shutting down schools, but by starving them of support. But then, in the darkest hour, the fire began to glow. Faced with collapsing support, something rare and powerful began to happen. Teachers, students, and ordinary citizens stepped in to fund education themselves. At the University of Ouagadougou, engineering seniors began teaching incoming students free of charge. In Koudougou, farming families organized weekend schools for their children, teaching them how to grow, budget, and sell, not from imported textbooks but from lived experience. The state did not start this, the people did, and the state did not stop them. For the first time, education became a movement, not a ministry program, not a political promise, a movement of self-worth. And far away in Kenya, when people learned of this quiet uprising in Burkina Faso, youth groups began asking different questions. If they can teach themselves, why are we still waiting for scholarships? Why are we still dependent on systems that don't see us? Because sometimes, the greatest revolution is not shouted in the streets, it's whispered in a classroom. It's a blackboard, a child, and the will to learn. Education, once used as a tool of colonial control, was becoming a weapon of freedom. So ask yourself, can a piece of chalk be more powerful than $1 billion bailout? If tomorrow, your own child asks you, can we learn without waiting for help, what will you say? In that new light, a deeper question is being asked across the continent. Are our faith, our knowledge, and our self-respect enough to keep our independence alive? Not in name, but in truth. In Burkina Faso today, people don't need orders to rebuild. In Kenya, police officers don't need slogans to speak their truth. And in Africa, once written off as a place to be saved, hope is emerging in the smallest of acts, a lesson shared, a notebook passed, a moment of belief. The world may continue to issue rankings, the headlines may keep pointing fingers, but something more powerful is already happening. Because when a mother teaches her child to love their homeland, when a student teaches another without seeking reward, that is no longer education, it is resurrection. They say every nation is given one moment to wake up. Maybe this is ours. So if you were in Traore's place, what would you pass down to the next generation? If you were the one to write a new history, where would you begin? Leave just one thing, one act you would do, for yourself and for Africa in the comments below.